Welcome to At Home with Music as we continue with our series on ear training. We're going to start with one of the basic building blocks of music, intervals. We'll learn to identify these intervals and listen to them. Let's get a basic definition. What is an interval? It's a measurement between two pitches. So why should we start with intervals when it comes to ear training? First of all, scales. Scales are made up of a series of intervals. You may remember this from a previous video that I've done on scales. Melodies are also made up of a series of intervals. Chords are made up of intervals stacked on top of each other. You can measure an interval in two ways. We can measure them horizontally, and this refers to what we call a melodic interval. The notes are played one at a time, one after the other. We can also measure an interval vertically. This refers to a harmonic interval. The notes are played together. So why would you benefit, or I should say, why will you benefit from learning to identify intervals? Well, as I mentioned, intervals are the building blocks of scales, chords, or you can call them harmonies if you like, and melodies. Scales are made up of a series of melodic intervals. The notes come one after the other. Melodies are also made up of a series of melodic intervals. And chords, as we mentioned, are made up of harmonic intervals. They're stacked on top of each other. And so, of course, the notes of a chord are played together. So let's begin identifying intervals by selecting a note. In this case, I'm selecting C, and we're going to call this the tonic, just like we would call it the tonic note of a C major scale. Now, when you measure from the tonic up to each note, or each scale degree, I should say, of a major scale, you find the following intervals. You start with what we call perfect unison. It's kind of hard to play two C's at the same time on one key. So think of it like two singers singing the exact same note. They are in perfect unison. Now, if we go from C to D, we have a major second. From C to E is a major third. From C to F is a perfect fourth. From C to G is a perfect fifth. From C to A is a major sixth. And then we have C to B, major seventh. And then from C to C is a perfect octave. Now you can start this on any note and play the notes of the major scale starting from any tonic, and you'll end up with this same set of intervals. So if I go from G and I play the notes of the G major scale, kind of hard to play and talk at the same time. The notes of the G major scale, so we have here major second, major third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, major sixth, major seventh, and perfect octave, or perfect eighth if you like. Now you'll notice that you can refer to an interval's quality just like you would a chord. Intervals can be major, they can also be minor, they can be perfect. And then there's this one special interval called the tritone, and we'll come back to that in a little bit. So when you measure from a tonic note, we'll go back to C, up to each scale degree of a major scale, all the intervals that we came up with are either perfect or major. And each of these intervals can be labeled with an abbreviation. So the name of each interval and the abbreviation that we use tells us two things. It tells us first the quality of the interval. So, for example, we had a major second, major third, and so on. And then the abbreviation also tells us the space between each note of the interval. So this is the tonic and the second note of the scale, the tonic and the third note, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, and so on. Now, for example, major sixth is abbreviated as capital M6. The capital M tells us that the quality of the interval is major. The 6 tells us that, once again, if we take the bottom note as a tonic, the top note represents the 6th note of the major scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, how will these intervals look on the staff? Well, that's important to know when it comes to reading a lead sheet. You'll be able to easily spot the intervals in a melody once you can see this. Odd-numbered intervals will always be a line to a line or a space to a space on the staff. Even-numbered intervals will always be a space to a line or a line to a space. So going back to interval quality, just as we've talked about the quality of a chord, major, minor, augmented, and diminished, we can talk about the quality of an interval. Intervals can be perfect, they can be major, they can be minor, and they can also be, in some cases, diminished or augmented. The unison, the fourth, and the fifth, and the octave can be classified as perfect intervals. They're not major, they're not minor, they're perfect. Conversely, the intervals of the second, the third, the sixth, and the seventh, these can be major or minor, but they're not perfect in quality. Now, we've already seen major intervals. We noticed that as we went up from the tonic to each note of the major scale, we only ended up with major intervals or perfect intervals. But minor intervals are 1/2 step smaller than perfect intervals. So, for example, let's go back to when we measured from the tonic up to each degree of a major scale. So we found 4 perfect intervals: unison, the fourth, the fifth, and the octave. And we found 4 major intervals: major second, major third, major sixth, and major seventh. We can take these major intervals and make them minor. We can either lower the top note or raise the bottom note. So take, for example, this major second. We play it vertically, just together. We can raise the C and make it a C sharp, or we can lower the D and make it a D flat. Either way, we end up now with a minor second. We can do the same thing with a major sixth. We can raise the bottom note. Now we have a minor sixth. Or we can lower the top note. This is also a minor sixth. We can also find all the intervals of every quality by starting with a basic note. We'll keep working with C here since that's where we've been. And we go up by 1/2 step. So if you go, and basically every note in the chromatic scale. Before we were using the major scale, now we're using the chromatic scale. So we have C to C sharp or D flat. That is a minor second. Major second. And then we have a minor third. And then a major third. And then we have a perfect fourth. Here we have this mysterious interval that I mentioned briefly earlier in the video. We can call that the tritone. It's exactly halfway between C and C. We can also call this an augmented fourth because we can take the fourth and raise it 1/2 step. We could also call it a diminished fifth. This is our perfect fifth, and we can lower the top note. That's the tritone. We keep going up the chromatic scale. We have the perfect fifth. By the way, listen very carefully to how these intervals sound. This would be a minor sixth, major sixth, minor seventh, major seventh, so kind of a dissonant sounding interval, And finally, perfect eighth, or a perfect octave. Here's another way you can find all the intervals. You can memorize how many half steps there are in each interval. So to determine the size of an interval, you count the number of half steps between the two notes, and then you kind of refer to your memory. So if you go 1/2 step, you've got a minor second. If you go 1 2/2 steps, major second. 3/2 steps, minor third. 1 2 3 4, major third. 1 2 3 4 5, perfect fourth. 1 2 3 4 5 6, there's our tritone. 1 2 3 4 5 6 7, perfect fifth. 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8. That gives us a minor sixth. 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9. A major sixth. 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10. Minor seventh. 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 11. Starting to sound a bit like Sesame Street, isn't it? Major seventh. 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 11 12. Perfect octave. By the way, you can even go beyond the octave to find some more intervals. For example, this would be a minor ninth, a major ninth, a minor tenth, and so on. Most of the time, you're not going to worry about going that far out. You may get a few of those minor ninth, major ninths, depending on if you're playing ninth chords and so on. But for now, we're just going to concern ourselves with the intervals that are found within the octave, and then later on we'll move on to the bigger intervals. So that's an introduction to intervals. Now, I hope you were listening carefully to the way these intervals sound. So for example, I'm going to play through every interval that we can find, starting once again with C as the tonic. And I'll name the interval and play it. Here's a minor second, major second, minor third, major third, perfect fourth. Notice I'm playing these as harmonic intervals, notes together. Tritone. Remember, this can also be called an augmented fourth or a diminished fifth. Perfect fifth. Minor sixth. Major sixth. Minor seventh. Major seventh. And octave. So get those sounds in your head, and if we want to keep going, minor ninth, major ninth. We'll go that far. Now in the next video in this series, we're going to stick with intervals, and you're going to actually begin to hear them, and you'll need to identify them. Anyway, I hope you found this helpful. I hope you're beginning to get the sound of those intervals into your mind. Once you learn to identify them by ear, that's the first big step in your ear training. Believe me, it's going to help everything about your music making. Thanks again for watching. If you'd like to support my work, once again, you can go to my Patreon page. I will leave the link in the description. And you can join. It doesn't cost very much, and it helps the channel a lot. What also helps the channel is if you like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I look forward to speaking to you in the next one, and we're going to start listening to some intervals. And we'll do that next week.